Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lily, and I'm the Climate and Disaster Resilience Manager at SoCal Grantmakers. I used she, her, ella pronouns, and I'm truly honored to welcome you to our third webinar on behalf of Philanthropy California. Philanthropy California is the convener of this project, and I wanted to tell you upfront a little bit more about what we do. In case you're unfamiliar, Philanthropy California is an initiative of California's three major philanthropy-serving organizations. So that includes ourselves at SoCal Grantmakers, Northern California Grantmakers, and Catalyst of San Diego and Imperial counties. And our work as an alliance focuses on key issues that impact our state, such as advancing equity, racial and gender justice, building an inclusive democracy, climate and disaster resilience, of course, and importantly, nonprofit sustainability. We are member-serving organizations, and our membership consists of over 600 foundations, corporate funders, philanthropic individuals and families, giving circles, and government agencies. So this year, Philanthropy California has deepened our partnership with the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services, or Cal-OES. And that led to the creation of this grant writing training series to build additional capacity for organizations just like yours that serve frontline communities. As you may have heard, with billions of federal dollars becoming available through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act, we're finding ourselves in a once-in-a-generation moment for philanthropy as well as organizations like yours to equitably invest in the capacity of communities to envision, plan, and implement projects. We also know from our work that qualifying for, receiving, and managing public funding can be burdensome, especially for small to mid-sized nonprofits, and especially BIPOC-led and tribal organizations. So through these trainings, we hope to continue providing this free resource to you, both virtually and in person. So make sure to visit our website, which I will share in the chat. It's climatecapacity.philanthropycalifornia.org to stay in touch about upcoming trainings that are online or ones in person that might be coming to your area in this year. All right, so that's a lot of housekeeping to start this event, but this event is really about you. And so I'd love to turn our attention to actually you. And so this is not required, but I would love to invite you to come on camera for this warm-up exercise if you are able. I won't ask you to do it again. You're welcome to stay off camera for the rest of the event if you'd like, although our speakers would love to see you. But I would also love to see you right now, just to get us started. So for this part of the event, we're going to be using the chat feature on Zoom. If you're unfamiliar with how to do it, you should see an icon that says chat on the bottom of your screen, and that will allow you to open the chat box. And what we're going to do as kind of a warm-up question is to do something called a chat waterfall. And so this is where I ask a question, and you can write down your answer in the chat box. And then when I say go, everyone will press enter, and then we'll see a beautiful waterfall of all of your responses. Okay, so this is just a practice one. Hopefully it's the easiest question. I would love to invite you to share in the chat where you're joining us from today. So everyone write it, but don't press send just yet. I'll give you 10 seconds. Hopefully you don't need too much more than that. Okay, everyone press send. Oh, wow. We've got quite a variation of where everyone's joining from. I see a lot of people from Central California. I see Sacramento, LA, Long Beach, Santana, Chula Vista. Nice to see you, April. Fresno, amazing. Oakland, all right, we've got a nice mix of people coming from all over. So thank you for joining virtually. It's nice to all be in the same space and share this afternoon together today. All right, next question, same format. And I would love to invite you to use emoji if that is something that helps you express yourself for the answer to this question. And to access the emoji in your chat, there should be a little smiley face icon in your chat options that you can use to select any emoji that feels appropriate. So next question is just, how are you feeling today? So everyone get your answers ready, and then we'll press go at the same time again. Oh, I see some early starters. And I see a lot of happy emojis. David, nice to see you. Virginia, Adriana. Okay, I didn't say go, but you guys are all just going, so please go ahead. I'm not sure what the star eyes emoji feels like, but I want that energy. And then puppies. I'm always happy when I see the puppy one. Thanks for sharing that, Sarah. Great. Okay. This next question is just so we can get a sense of uh, who's here and who's been part of our previous trainings before. So if you've been to more than one of these virtual trainings, and you can count the in-person ones, please give a thumbs up emoji in the chat. And you can just go ahead and answer. I don't have to say go. Oh, wow. Amira, so good to see you again. Wonderful. Okay, Sarah and Katie, I see you, but you're part of the team, so that doesn't count. Actually, it does count, but not in the same way. Madeline, Nancy, Beatriz, welcome back. It's so great to see you again. Thank you. Okay, and then last question as part of this warm-up. Using just a few words, could you tell us what you want to learn from today's webinar, and what you hope to get out of it? And you seem already energized, so I don't have to say go. You can just go ahead and put it in the chat. And you can take your time thinking about this one. Yeah, Jennifer, what's new since the last time you wrote grants? Christina says the latest best practices on program design. Great, that's very specific and relevant to today's training in particular. I also see more information about how to best write grants, tips and tricks on how to make it easier, work plan design, outcomes versus objectives. These are all great. And we will be sharing the chat after the event. So if you're curious about what others are curious about, you'll get all of this in the follow-up materials. Thank you so much for sharing. I think that everything that you're putting in the chat will be addressed in some way during today's training. And I just want to emphasize how happy I am that you're here today. And also we have people who are joining us for the second or perhaps third time. This training is absolutely for you if you are either just getting started getting grants or applying for grants, or maybe it's been a while and you want an update. Or maybe you're a seasoned grant writer and just want to stay fresh on different skills and want the latest. So with that, I would love to continue to invite you to engage in the chat box. Feel free to share your contact information, your organization, and use this space as a different way to connect with one another during this training. Again, we'll be sharing the chat, so we'll send this out if you want to follow up with anyone else whose name you see or organization you see in order to maybe make a different connection or engage in a potential collaboration or partnership. This is also what this space is for. So we openly invite that. Thank you for participating in the warm-up. I hope you're warmed up. And with that, I will pass it back to GBA. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lily. I love seeing what everyone writes in the chat box. And I see the last message visible is help with sourcing possible funding opportunities. You're in luck. That's what today's about. Let me share today's slides. This is Sarah speaking again, and I'm introducing our grant writing curriculum, the teaching parts of today's webinar. As Lily said, this is webinar 3 in a series of 5. On April 11th, we had a presentation on organizational capability and statement of need. You'll see those 2 items in the list. Today, we're talking about program plan and funder searches, which are circled on the slide. This slide shows the parts of a written grant proposal. And a funder search isn't exactly part of writing a proposal. You can see how we had to add it off to the side. Funder searches are a step that comes first, long before you put pen to paper to write a specific grant. In a funder search, you look for funders likely to support your program plan, the set of activities you've decided that your organization wants to undertake. So these 2 topics are very closely related. Your program plan will be compelling to some funders and within the scope of activities that they prefer to support, while for other funders, it's outside their scope, and they would never fund certain types of programs, no matter how skillfully a grant proposal was written, simply because some programs are outside of the area of focus of some funders. The point of today's webinar is to talk about how to ensure that match between the funders you've decided to apply to and the program plan that you've designed to fulfill the mission of your organization and meet community needs. So, our first topic is unlocking funding opportunities, a guide to effective funder searches. Maddie Jones-Mills is our first presenter. She works with me at Gary Bess Associates, where she's one of our senior grant writers. She's also our director of operations. She has an extensive background in grant writing for nonprofits, for health and community organizations, and others. And about funder searches, she says she enjoys the problem solving and the strategy in finding funders that are a perfect fit for organizations and their planned programs. Making that match is satisfying, and a good match gives you the best chance of having a successful grant. Maddie, thank you so much for presenting today. I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Maddie Jones-Mills. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm looking forward to spending just a little bit of time discussing funder searches with you all. Before I begin, please note that additional detail will be provided in the webinar slides that are available for download after this presentation. Next slide, please. So before you begin your funder search, it's helpful to think through 3 steps that we'll cover in the next few slides. Step 1 is to determine the type of funding your organization needs. The 3 most common types of grant support are capital, program, and general operating. Your organization may need one of these types of support or multiple types of support. A capital grant is a type of financial assistance provided to fund specific capital projects or campaigns. Unlike operating grants, which typically support ongoing operational expenses like salaries or utilities, capital grants are specifically designated for the acquisition, construction, or renovation of tangible assets, such as buildings, infrastructure, equipment, or land. A program grant supports the implementation of a specific program, project, or initiative that aligns with the mission, goals, and priorities of the grant maker. And a general operating grant, also sometimes known as unrestricted funding or core support, is a type of grant that supports an organization's overall mission, activities, and day-to-day operations. Unlike program grants, which are earmarked for specific programs or projects, general operating grants offer flexibility in how the funds are used by the recipient organization. Next slide, please. After you determine what kind of support your organization needs, step 2 is to consider the population or populations you intend to serve. This, of course, will vary widely based on the mission or purpose of your organization, but we have a few examples here. Your population of focus could be individuals experiencing homelessness, individuals recently released from incarceration, individuals with disabilities, children, seniors, persons affected by disasters, or rural residents. Next slide, please. And finally, step 3 is to consider the geographic location you serve. This may be a particular city, a county or counties, a defined service area encompassing certain zip codes, an entire state, or even the nation. You'll find that some funders, in addition to preferring to support certain kinds of projects, also have geographic restrictions on where they make their grants. Next slide, please. When you have identified steps 1 to 3, so the type of funding your organization needs, your population of focus, and the geographic location you serve, you now have some basic keywords for your funder search. You'll find that there are indices in most funder directories that will allow you to search by keywords. For example, if your organization needs capital support for construction of a senior mental health facility in Imperial County, your search terms could be capital support plus seniors plus Imperial County. Or another example, if your organization needs support for an outreach program for unhoused individuals in Chico, your search terms could be program support plus individuals experiencing homelessness plus Chico. Next slide, please. If you would like more tailored search results, try adding some specifics to these basic search terms. For example, you might add mental health facility and construction to your search for capital support, or substance use disorder and outreach to your search for program support for an outreach program serving unhoused individuals in Chico. Next slide, please. As you conduct your funder search, you will come across public and private grant funding opportunities. Public grants are funded by government entities at various levels, such as city or county, state, or federal agencies. These funds are typically derived from tax revenues or other fees and are allocated for specific purposes. Decisions regarding public grant funding allocation may be influenced by political considerations, budgetary use constraints, and public policy priorities. Public grants are also often given in large sums and for multiple years, covering the majority of your project costs. Public grants are usually easier to identify than private funding. With public grants, the application process is also typically prescribed, forms are commonly reused, and the funding body will explicitly state if there is a possibility of renewal after that initial grant period elapses. Next slide, please. In addition to other sources, public funding can be found by searching federal and state websites. Grants.gov is the central portal for finding and applying for federal grants in the United States, serving as a single access point for over 1,000 grant programs offered by various federal agencies. The California Grants portal is a similar platform to grants.gov, but is tailored for grant opportunities within the state of California. The California Grants Portal is a centralized hub for finding and applying for grants offered by California state agencies, such as the Environmental Protection Agency or the Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. Next slide, please. Private grants are funded by private organizations, such as community foundations, corporate foundations, or family foundations. Private funders are typically more flexible in responding to local needs and may have faster turnaround times for dispersing grant funds. Applications and reports for private grants are generally simpler than for public grants. Private grant funders are also usually more accessible than public funders, and grant opportunities are sometimes less competitive. Next slide, please. There are several different types of private funding entities. Community foundations hold public charity status, have local expertise in the needs of the community they serve, and involve community members in leadership positions, such as the board of directors. Examples include Silicon Valley Community Foundation, which serves the Silicon Valley region, and the California Community Foundation, which serves the greater Los Angeles area, including the city of Los Angeles and its surrounding counties. Next slide, please. Corporate foundations are created and financially supported by a corporation and typically make grants in fields related to their corporate activities in communities where the corporation operates or in areas where their employees reside. Examples include the Safeway Foundation, which is associated with the Safeway supermarket chain, the Blue Shield of California Foundation, which is associated with the Blue Shield of California health insurance company, and the Taco Bell Foundation, which is the philanthropic arm of the Taco Bell fast food restaurant chain. Next slide, please. Corporate giving programs are funded by donations from corporate employees, which are then matched by the corporation. These programs typically include both grant funding and volunteer hours donated by corporate employees. For example, the Home Depot Foundation's corporate giving program provides financial support, product donations such as building supplies, and volunteer assistance to various nonprofit organizations and community projects, with the goal of making a positive impact in the communities where Home Depot stores operate. Next slide, please. Other types of private funding include family foundations, giving circles, and donor-advised funds. Family foundations are, of course, created by a family. Family members and their advisors often serve on the board of directors or assist with governance and giving decisions. Approximately 1/2 of all private foundations are family foundations. Giving circles and donor-advised funds are used to pool gifts by individual donors overseen by a 501c3 charity. Community foundations, for example, often administer donor-advised funds. Donors can then provide input into how these funds are distributed. Next slide, please. While there are many different databases that grant seekers can use to search funding opportunities, this is a brief list for you. It's certainly not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the most popular databases for funder searches listed here. Each of these databases you'll see requires a paid subscription for use. However, some do offer short-term subscription options and/or free trial periods. Next slide, please. After searching grant databases and identifying potential funders, it is helpful to compile key information you found into one cohesive funder search document. Key components to include in that document are contact information, including the funder or key contact's phone number, email, and mailing address, the funder's areas of focus or interest, such as food security or mental health, the grant award amount or range, and any relevant deadlines. You may also wish to review the funder's Form 990. Form 990 is a public document that tax-exempt organizations in the United States must file with the Internal Revenue Service on an annual basis. It provides detailed information about the organization's finances, governance, and activities, as well as a list of grant recipients and award amounts for that fiscal year. You can find Form 990 on the IRS website at irs.gov under the Forms and Instructions section. Additionally, many tax-exempt organizations make their Form 990 filings available to the public on their own websites or through subscription-based platforms like Candid. Finally, it is helpful to include some information on how you plan to approach the funder. This could be through a letter of inquiry, an online grant application, or another method, such as informal networking or an introductory phone call. Next slide, please. So here you'll see an example of a funder search document. You'll see that it includes contact information for the funder, including address, phone, email, and website, an overview of the funder's areas of interest and focus, the grant award amount or range, and all relevant deadlines, as well as information on how to structure your initial approach to the funder. This concludes my presentation, everyone. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Sarah, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Maddie. This is Sarah speaking again. We have one final slide in this section, and I want to remind everyone of the funding opportunities list that we recently posted on the Climate Capacity website. This is a picture of it right here. You can enter search terms at the top left. You can sort and filter the list by choices like whether a grant is regional or whether it's statewide. You can choose by what type of support it's for. Some of the categories we have there are fire, flooding, capacity building, general support, and other topics. So this list was created by Gary Bess Associates when we did our own funder for climate-related grants at the federal, state, regional, and local levels. You'll need to narrow it even further, of course, based on your program design, to find opportunities that are a match for your organization. But this is one place you can start. Now, this is our time for questions and answers about funder searches. If you have a question, you can raise your hand. We'll spotlight you for the group, and I'll invite you to unmute and share your questions or comments. I'll also be starting with questions that are coming in via the chat box. I see some there now. Andrea Lee asks, do you have this type of search tool / function outside of climate-related grants? And I can speak to that one because it's about resources of the Climate Capacity Project. We don't have anything like that focused outside of climate capacity areas. However, this would probably be a time to investigate some of the sources that Maddie mentioned. Maddie, I don't know if you want to speak any further or any other recommendations about that question.
Sure, this is Maddie speaking. I would say that, any of those funder search databases that were listed on the slide would be a good starting point for searching for any kind of grant. Like I mentioned, most, if not all of them, have indices where you can plug in keywords that relate to your subject area. So it's certainly not just limited to climate-related grants.
Great. Thank you, Maddie. A question from the chat box from Sarah Hubbard is, how is capacity building different from general operating / program / capital funds?
Sure, this is Maddie again speaking. Capacity building typically, from what I've seen, refers to building or expanding the capabilities of an organization to respond to a particular problem or issue that they see in the community or within their organization. So usually, in my experience, I've seen capacity building sort of fall under the general operating. So some organizations will use a general operating grant to build capacity. Sometimes there are also grants released specifically for capacity building that are just sort of categorized as their own thing. And that is my take on it. I'm more than happy to do some more researching and get back to you with a more satisfying answer if you need additional information.
This is Sarah. I would add, when we use the term capacity building in the climate funding related opportunities in the description of that list, it's capacity building likely related to disaster response and climate response. So in our topic areas, and it sounds like Maddie's explaining that you'll find capacity building in other topic areas as well. Another question is, okay, here's a big one. Just give me a second. It's in the chat box, and let me read through it and figure out how we should discuss it as a group. All right. I'm going to read this whole description out. Unless, Luna Hernandez, do you desire to unmute and ask your question to the group? I'll go ahead and read this. I'm a brand new grant writer. And as a nonprofit under fiscal sponsorship in its seeding phase, one of the difficulties we're having is getting connected with private funds. A lot of family foundations, for example, are by invitation only. What is one recommendation to be able to navigate the gatekeeping in private funding, besides what we're already doing, which is being connected to private funds through our collaboration, allies, and kinship circles that are already plugged into the foundation themselves?
This is Maddie speaking again. This is a pretty common issue. I would say that one of the strategies I've used in the past is to just, I know you may have heard it before, but just try to make a human to human connection. That could be, even if it says, hey, we don't accept unsolicited applications, drafting an email and saying, hey, this is what our organization does. Would you give us the chance to have a 10 or 15-minute conversation with you and tell you about the work that we're doing? Or you could cold call. Some people do that. Or you could, request, can we have an introductory call for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and basically just have a pitch for your organization prepared. It doesn't always work, but sometimes it will help you get your foot in the door. And the worst case scenario is they say no, so that's my take.
Thank you, Luna, for the question. Thank you, Maddie, for the answer. Please take a look in the chat box. We've got some additional discussion about what capacity building grants might mean from the perspective of certain funders. Have a look there. But
Sarah,
now,
is it okay if I add something to that?
yeah, go ahead,
Okay.
Lily.
I didn't want to interrupt either of you. Luna, this is a really good question, and I agree wholeheartedly with what Maddie has already said. And I wanted to reinforce by saying that the funders that we engage with have also said something similar, and they really encourage organizations to start building relationships with them early during periods where there might not even be an open grant opportunity. We are hoping that our trainings can be spaces where organizations like yours can interface with funders both on the public side in government as well as philanthropic funders. We really are emphasizing the importance of creating space to make those connections. In some cases, funders might invite letters of interest, and this is case by case. It's not everybody, but wanting to reinforce here that being able to connect with funders through convenings, conferences, perhaps events that they are hosting or that you are hosting and you might want to invite funders to attend would be good ways to bridge these connections.
Thank you, Lily. This is now our short break. It will last for 5 minutes. During that time, please take a look at the poll questions that we're going to share. You'll see them pop up in a window in your Zoom interface. Take a look at them now before you go, or when you come back from the short break. There are 3 questions, so scroll down in the box so you can see and answer them all. We'll review the group's answers when we come back, but your answers won't be visible as belonging to you. They'll only be combined with the whole group. So enjoy your short break. I'll call you back when it's over. You'll hear my voice. Thanks. Okay, everyone, it's time to be heading back to the webinar. As we gather, I'll ask that our poll answers be displayed, please, so we can see the grouped answers. While that's being done and while folks are taking a look, I would like to take a moment to thank our Spanish language interpreter, Andrea Rocha. The main reason we take a break in the middle is to give her a chance to catch her breath. Thank you, Andrea, for what you're doing to make our webinar more accessible. Let's turn towards the answers to the poll questions. The first question was, does your organization have program concepts you've developed that you are seeking funding for? 75% of those who answered said yes. 25% said no. Second question is, in the first part of the webinar, did you learn of any places to search for funding that were new to you? 81% said yes, 19% said no. I'm happy that the answers leaned towards yes on that one. Third question is, have you explored the funding opportunities on the Climate Capacity website yet? 14% said yes, thank you, yay. 86% said no. My invitation is to please take a look. I had a positive experience with that list the other day. I didn't create it, so I'm not that familiar with what results there were of our funder search. But we had a question related to housing. I went to the website, I typed in housing in the search box, and I identified at least one opportunity that was specific to housing remediations related to climate readiness. So bring your project there, have a look and see what's available. Our second topic today is creating impactful programs, a guide to effective program design. Onawa Haynes of Hozhonigo Consulting is our presenter. Onawa is Dene, which is Navajo and Mescalero Apache, and she started her career as a lawyer working in tribal law and justice. And that background led to the work she does today, which is using her grant writing and program design expertise to gain resources for tribal programs and communities. Hozhonigo Consulting also specializes in project management, which is what you do to successfully implement a program after the grant's been awarded. She'll be talking about all of those aspects, conceptualizing, designing, and implementing a grant program today. Onawa, we are so pleased to have you present to us today. I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Sarah. My name is Onawa, as Sarah mentioned, and I'm very delighted to be here with you all today. Next slide, please. So we used the phrase earlier in the presentation, pen to paper. When we think about grant writing, really what comes to mind for a lot of people is getting down to the grant writing process and putting pen to paper. But the truth is, grant writing begins far before that process. When we are approached by a client or a potential client or folks who need support, the first question that we ask them is, are you grant ready? Now, grant readiness is determined by a number of factors that can include partnerships, documentation, taking a look at your budget and budgetary needs, as well as what is called shovel readiness. Next slide, please. Now, one thing you want to do is kind of zoom out from any sort of funding opportunity that you're thinking about applying for, or when you need to have your program or your project implemented. You want to develop a planning timeline. Now, ideally, as a grant writing firm, we try to help folks shift their mindset from being more reactive to being proactive. Typically, when folks come to us, it's because they have found a grant application that they would like to apply for, and we then have to apply the grant readiness determining factors. And what we like for these folks to do is to start building their programs and their projects to tell funders what they need, rather than funders telling them what they will support. So it's taking a little bit of power back in your program development and program design. Any good grant writer or project lead should also be a good project manager. And your project lead or grant writer should identify a target date and develop your project plan and work backwards from that date, as well as identifying any necessary documents or attachments for your grant opportunity. One tip that I like to share is that, and this was alluded to earlier, any grant opportunity, you can look at prior grant opportunities to see what they required and anticipate the due date and the required documents, and work backwards from that particular anticipated grant deadline. Next slide, please. Partnerships are incredibly important when it comes to program design, because any good program is only as good as its partnerships. I always like to call it assembling the Avengers when you pull together your program team. Now, your program team is going to consist of different folks and different entities depending on your individual program or project needs. This can include administrators, subject matter experts, staff from various related programs, cultural practitioners or elders, tribal leaders. In addition, some grant opportunities may take a look at your ecosystem, or you might be operating within an ecosystem. Your ecosystem might include partner organizations, credentialed professionals. For instance, you might be required to have a research partner from a university. An example I like to use is that I work with a small business incubator on the Navajo Nation. They specifically work with Navajo small business owners on the Navajo Nation, and they are a part of a larger ecosystem that includes partner organizations who serve Native American entrepreneurs in rural communities, in urban settings, and for instance, Native American women entrepreneurs. So they have a larger ecosystem. This enables them to not only look for funding opportunities for their organization, but also to look at funding opportunities for the larger ecosystem. And it also shows funders that they are building partnerships and that they are working towards a solution for their larger ecosystem that they are a part of. Stakeholders are also incredibly important. Now, your stakeholders can include your community members, your local governments, your tribal leaders or tribal entities. So stakeholder involvement and stakeholder partnerships are very important, and we'll talk a little bit more about this when we get to the next couple of slides. Next slide, please. Continuing on the theme of partnerships, it's incredibly important to get input from those partnerships to inform your program design. It's very important to hear from those who are in closest proximity to the problem or the issue that you are trying to address. Getting this input from the different partnerships or the different stakeholders can include conducting surveys, conducting listening sessions or public hearings, providing public comment periods, conducting interviews, and different ways that perhaps your community or your stakeholders operate. One important part of collecting this input is that you can aggregate this information and data and use it as not only a design tool, but you can also use this as strong documentation for a grant application. Next slide, please. Speaking of partnership documentation, this really will depend on any grant opportunity that you're going to be applying for, and that can vary from grant opportunity to grant opportunity. Some examples of documentation that may be required from your partnerships for various grant opportunities can include a memorandum of understanding, or an MOU for short, or a memorandum of agreement, or MOA. It can include letters of support, either from past participants in your program, from community members, from community partner organizations. Letters of commitment, again, those can come from maybe tribal leaders, those can come from partnership organizations. Planning documents are also helpful if you have embarked on a strategic planning process, or if you have held community meetings, you've gathered input, and you've taken the time to create some sort of plan for your project or your program. Planning documents can be very helpful. And as I mentioned in my last slide, aggregating data, and that can be a number of things. For justice systems, it is sometimes taking a look at the different crime rates. For this particular subject matter, it can be taking a look at the instances of natural disasters or those types of events that you are trying to mitigate. So again, this is going to vary from opportunity to opportunity, but my advice in gathering documentation is to make sure that you, during your planning process, as a project or program team, you are trying to understand who should have a voice, who should be at the table, and starting to think about how you can document those partnerships, how you can document the support that you have received for this program, and making sure that you get these documents early or before you get into the grant writing process. As soon as you see that you need them, start getting the ball rolling on those documents. Next slide, please. Activities. Our number one guidance to the folks that we work with, we make sure to set some very stern guidelines and boundaries. And we ask, are your activities that you are going to be planning for or that you're going to be applying for in any particular grant opportunity, are these activities something that you already do, or are they activities that you've already planned to do, perhaps in your strategic plan? This is so incredibly important because you should never plan your activities around the funder or develop brand new programming based on a funding opportunity. This creates so much more work for your program, and it also might mean that you are taking your eye off of what your strategic plan might be, or that you're pouring resources into something that may not serve your community, or it may not be working towards long-term solutions. So sometimes it can get very enticing to see a grant opportunity for a lot of money, but if it is not aligned with your current activities or activities that are on your roadmap or part of your strategic plan, you gotta let them go. And it's not to say that those opportunities might not fit later on, so you can keep them kind of in your back pocket for later. So the tip here is that this is where stakeholder and program team input is key to informing your program activities. You want to make sure that what you're doing is going to be benefiting your community, that it's going to be working towards your long-term solutions. Next slide, please. Okay, so when it comes to activities, we start asking ourselves some key questions. This will help us to determine what information and what planning we need to do. So first, how long will it take? How long will your project take to complete? This is important because you want to look at the grant period of performance. Now, let's say that your program is a 3-year program. It's going to take 3 years in order for this program to get launched, or maybe it will run its course in 3 years and serve its purpose in those 3 years. But the grant opportunity that you're looking at is 12 months. So you've got 1 year. Do you need to break activities into phases? This will help in your searching for grants to kind of see, we call it braided funding. It'll help you to look at how can I make sure that I have enough funding to cover all 3 of those years. And in my activities, how can I strategically break these up so that I can present them as individual phases to a funder? And what I mean by phases is, for instance, think about a capital or a construction project. Phase 1 might be getting your architectural designs. Phase 2 might be all of your pre-construction activities or getting, any sort of land prepared for construction. Phase 3 may be the actual construction project itself. So be very strategic in thinking about how you can get things accomplished based off of the different grant opportunity timelines. Next, are you able to carry out all of the activities on your own, or do you require partner organizations? Perhaps your organization has an expertise in one specific area, but in order to carry out the entire activity in this program, you need a partner organization who has expertise in a complementary area. That's important as well, because you're going to want to understand where you might need those MOUs, the Memorandum of Understanding, or the letters of commitment, so on and so forth. Next, how much will your program cost? This is important because you want to understand how much money you need. And this will help, referring back to your grant search, this will help to understand when you're looking at grant opportunities, what is the maximum amount on a grant and what is the minimum amount. And sometimes you'll have to kind of approach this again in a phased fashion in order to get all of the funding that you need for this program. The next thing is, what are the allowable activities? A lot of federal grants will not cover things such as food, and you'll want to make sure that you can include all of the things that you are including in your activities. You'll want to make sure that they can be covered by the grant. So will they cover administrative costs? Will they cover construction projects? So you'll want to make sure to take a look, and especially when I go through federal grant opportunities, I just do a Control F and search for allowable activities. Next is, will your activities include a capital project? And we'll talk a little bit more about this. And you'll remember capital projects can include renovation, acquisition, or construction. And those are the three buckets that I am talking about when I refer to a capital project here. Next slide, please. So we talked a little bit about the budget and allowable activities. So when you are developing your budget, you want to ensure that you are thinking about your activities versus your budget. And ask yourself, are the activities that I am planning to do included in my budget? And are the budget items that I've included, are those reflected in my activities? And what I mean by this is, when you're going in to write your grant, if you're talking about certain activities, they should also be reflected within your grant budget. And your grant budget should, vice versa, reflect your activities. So let's say you are applying for a grant for strategic planning. Well, your budget has costs to purchase a vehicle fleet. The two don't really jive. And so you'll want to make sure that your narrative and your activities justify your budget, and your budget justifies your activities. Next slide, please. Okay, so we talked about capital projects. The term that is used very heavily in the grant writing world when it comes to capital projects, construction, is shovel ready. That means if a funding agency gives you the money, that you'll be ready to get started on this project right away. Being shovel ready can involve a few things. It can mean that you already have your architectural drawings. It can mean you already have construction estimates, that you have any right-of-way permissions that are necessary, that you have your environmental assessments, sometimes called NEPA, N-E-P-A, that you have any necessary cultural assessments, which would apply to tribes and tribal entities. And these would be completed by your THPO officer, T-H-P-O officer. Also, do you have all of the necessary Bureau of Indian Affairs, or BIA, approvals? And this again would apply to tribes and tribal entities. So being shovel ready can mean a number of things. It really just goes back to your planning process and your timeline to make sure that you have all of the necessary documents, that you have all of the necessary steps completed to make your project shovel ready. Next slide, please. So I hope I've covered kind of the bread and butter of program design, and I will turn it back over to Sarah.
Thank you very much, Onawa. We have already got questions coming in to the chat box. We'll start with those, and then as I ask them, as we discuss them, if there are follow-up questions or more discussion needed, I will ask folks who have that additional discussion or questions to raise their hand. Then we'll be able to identify you to unmute and continue the discussion. So let's start with a question from Susie Podnazik. She asks, is public funding more often awarded for multiple years that would accommodate the phases that you described, compared with private or foundation funds that are often 12 months?
This is Onawa. Thank you for that question. I would say I don't have an answer because, and I would invite others to chime in who are on the panel today. I would say that I have seen more so 12-month awards, and what tends to happen is foundations in particular like to build relationships and rapport with organizations that they work with prior to then opening up multiple years funding. But I will turn it over to any of my fellow panelists if they have something to add.
I can try to add to this. So this tends to vary depending on the funding opportunity. So I would encourage you to read the notification of funding opportunity or request for proposals. There tends to be a document that gets released with these notifications that outlines all of the criteria for the opportunity. And so we have seen a lot of variance. We've seen public funding opportunities be multi-year. We've also seen philanthropic funding be multi-year, and it varies from funder to funder. I will say within the philanthropy serving organizations circuit, we are pushing for more multi-year funding and more general operating support and more trust-based philanthropy as best practices. It is slow going, but this is where we hope to see the field move. So the best answer I can give you is to always check the notification of funding opportunity, just to be clear.
Maddie, did you have anything to add?
This is Maddie. Not particularly. I mean, everything that Onawa and Lily have covered already, I would second that. I think there's a ton of variance. It really just completely depends on the opportunity, and the best thing to do is to really read the RFP, with a keen eye. That's the best advice that I would give.
Another question from the chat box from Luna Hernandez is, what's the difference between an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, a letter of support, and a letter of commitment?
This is Onawa. I would say that I'll start with a letter of support, and I'll give some examples that may be helpful. So we'll go back to the small business incubator that I work with on the Navajo Nation. So they are going to be working with a large loan fund to give out loans to Navajo small business owners. They are required to show that they have a memorandum of understanding with the Navajo Nation, who is going to be providing them with the funds to disperse to Navajo business owners. Now they are also required to have a letter of support from alumni of their lending program to say, this is how this program supported me and made an impact on my business. And a letter of commitment needs to be provided by their initial partner, who is a credit union that initially kicked off the project and saying that we will continue to provide our expertise and our programming so that they can lean on our expertise to ensure this project is successful. So I hope those examples were helpful.
Another question from the chat box from John Lynn. Can you talk a bit more about ongoing programs instead of projects that have an end date?
This is Onawa. Would you mind providing a bit more context about what exactly you need to know?
John, could you please electronically raise your hand? There you are. Please unmute and tell us what you want us to know.
All right, thank you for that opportunity. So most of my programs are ongoing programs, and when we were talking about program designs and putting that into a project proposal, we mentioned like, oh, this will happen in 3 years or like happen in 1.5 years. But then with my programs are designed to be ongoing, how do I convert that or implement that into what we just talked about?
This is Onawa. Thank you so much for that additional context. And again, after my response, I invite my fellow panelists to give their input. For ongoing programs, and this is my experience with the folks I work with, we set metrics or goals from year to year. And those are kind of how we work around proposing programmatic timelines. So if we are approaching a grant that is 12 months, we take a look at our 12-month deliverables, and I'm using a lot of words here, our 12-month goals, and that is what we commit to so that we can show impact during those 12 months. And if the grant is longer than that, typically they will ask for those types of goals and measurables from year to year. But again, it really does just depend on the RFP, the funding opportunity, the notice of funding opportunity. So I'll turn it over to my fellow panelists if they have anything to add. Thank you.
I'm seeing head shake from Maddie, nothing else to add. Same from Lily, nothing else to add. I will just say on that topic that the question of differentiating between a project that has a start and an end date and a program activity that is fully integrated in your operations, that is the focus. Like the transition from one to the other is the focus of a lot of program design, a lot of sustainability efforts. It's a very important question and also sometimes a tough one. So, John, you're not alone in encountering that question and how to answer it within your program implementation. I'll turn back to the chat box. A follow-up question for Lily is, can you expand on what trust-based efforts are in the philanthropic arena? I've heard about the multi-year and general op efforts, but not the trust one. And to the audience, I'll say, look in the chat box for an additional link about this, some more reading material. But Lily, is there anything you'd like to say to the group?
Yes, this is Lily. Thank you for the question, Luna. I appreciate you bringing this up, and I apologize for not defining the term earlier when I used it. I would encourage you to visit the link that Katie shared about trust-based philanthropy. You will hear this term hopefully a lot more as we move forward. Within the philanthropic sector, we use this term to refer to a set of values and practices that we would like to see implemented in order to overall reduce barriers to entry and barriers to access to funding. One example that I've already shared in the chat is for funders who have, for example, perhaps funded a grantee for multiple years already, where that relationship and that trust is already there, to perhaps streamline reporting requirements instead of having to write a very long quarterly report or monthly report on grant activities. Perhaps it's just a phone call, or perhaps there's no report required. And to think about how to streamline that process and reduce the burden administratively on a grantee that is already within that funder's network and portfolio. Another example that we advocate for quite a bit is multi-year unrestricted funding. So this is related to, but not quite the same as general operating support. As many of you may already know, funding sometimes can come with restrictions. The grant may be able to fund operating costs, but for whatever reason, not food, which we see quite a bit in public grants. And so to advocate for philanthropy to simply give unrestricted funding is something that we hope to see more under these trust-based principles. And then finally, I think it's worth sharing that another trust-based practice is to have funders participate in power building and power sharing. So we really believe in the power behind social capital as well, for funders to open up their networks and partnerships that they have within the fields that they know with their grantees, and to be able to bridge relationships, build future partnerships, and perhaps even build additional opportunities to access funding. I'm not sure if other panelists would like to add to that, or any of the Philanthropy California team who I know are also on this call. I hope that helps, Luna. Thanks for the question.
We've got a raised hand from Katie Oran. Katie, would you like to unmute and provide more?
Yeah, sure. Just an additional point to this, and linking back to a question that we got earlier around how to connect with philanthropic funders whose funding programs are only made available via invitation to apply. And so another aspect of trust-based philanthropy is really understanding that that is an incredible barrier for nonprofits to access these resources, and that funding should be made accessible. So not through just only these kind of relational aspects, but also the ability to apply online or philanthropic organizations that accept letters of intent and things like that. So that's kind of an additional component of this as well.
Thank you, Katie. This is Sarah. And by way of summary, I would like to point out to our audience, I think you're hearing some of the differences between public funding and private funding in this discussion, and that, like, some of the pluses and minuses for pursuing relationships with private funders, and the difficulties, the challenges, and then the positives of pursuing public funding, where it's multi-year, onerous application processes, but very standardized. And you can choose what is a fit for your organization and your project, or explore relationships on both sides and determine what is most strategic for the programs that you desire to develop. We are 3 minutes from the end of our time. I would like us to move to wrap up for now. And look also in the chat box. Again, conversation is continuing there, and we're grateful for that. And panelists are providing some answers there. Thank you, Onawa. For now, I would like to ask us to turn our attention towards the link to the follow-up survey, the post-webinar survey that we'll be placing into the chat box. Click the link to open it, share your thoughts on today's webinar. Also know that as you leave the webinar, the same survey will open in a window in your web browser. And remember, this is how we measure our outcomes on this grant-funded program. So we're very grateful for any feedback that you're willing to provide. We hope to see you again for the remaining webinars in this grant writing series. Those will be on May 7th and May 14th. And recordings for all of these will be available on the Climate Capacity website. Lily, is it possible to get the survey link and place it in the chat?
Yes, I was.
There it is.
Oh, there we
We've
go.
got it. It's
Thanks,
there.
Mom.
Click the survey open from the link in the chat box or from the window that opens after you leave. I would like to, in this concluding moment, thank our presenters. Thanks for your excellent information, the experience that you obviously bring on these topics. And thank you everyone else for being here today. We're glad you were here, and we're glad we got the chance to talk to you. Our webinar is concluded for today. You may disconnect now.